Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Future of Work series. My name is Sarah Gomel from Quorum One, and I'm really lucky to be joined here today with Travis Marsh. Travis is an author, facilitator, teacher, and coach focused on creating impactful teams and strong relationships. He facilitates a class at Stanford Graduate School of Business on interpersonal dynamics, which is widely regarded as one of the most powerful and influential courses at GSB. He is the co-author of Lead Together, The Bold, Brave, Intentional Path to Scaling Your Business, which focuses on the practical steps to create a paradigm shift in how leadership and followership can effectively work in scaling organizations. He focuses on helping leaders and build leaders at for-purpose and nonprofit organizations between 20 to 200 people. He believes that it's possible to be more human and more impactful, and that these things often go hand in hand. Thanks so much for joining us today, Travis.
Sarah, I'm excited to be here.
Well, let's get into it. So these frameworks that you are an expert in were really kind of new to me. So can you take a moment and kind of walk us through what is an emergent organization, what is a DAO, and how do those two things differ?
So emergent organization is kind of a collection of a bunch of different types of organizations, but let's compare it to what it's not. Like a traditional organization is the one that we've been working on with a command and control hierarchy. And it's based on a couple of underlying principles, right? The person with the best ideas probably rises through the ranks. There's an idea of individualism, that capital is more primary than people, right? That the largest shareholder should have the loudest voice and say, firing the CEO. It's very much the Milton Friedman shareholder primacy sort of idea. That then ideas and individuals should be rewarded for the value that they create. So everything from IP laws to management by objectives to even sales comp are just an instantiation of this, where we want to motivate people to go make more money and go win capitalism. When you think about this, a great example of an organization like this is Boat. They've been very focused on driving towards shareholder primacy. And not only did that tank the stock price and kill value there, it literally killed real people because there is so much focus on let's just optimize this individual metric and not even care about any externalities. So I love emergent organizations, and these are big groups, right? You could see this as agile organizations or conscious capitalism or TEAL for people that have read Reinventing Organizations, or deliberately developmental organizations or multi-stakeholder capital. All of these things are trying to bring in some aspect of something that was externalized and include it and care about it. So that always focuses on some form of people, planet, or purpose. And when you bring in these things back into the fold, it's more complex, it's harder to manage, but it's more in line with the world as it is right now. And because of that, the long-term value that you can create for shareholders, for employees, for customers, for planet is much, much higher. And then another variant of that that's really caught the limelight in the last couple of years, DAOs, right? This comes out of the crypto space, and it stands for autonomous organizations. But in the end, it's just a collection of individuals that are united by some sort of purpose. So supposedly they've got no central authority. I think the reality that all of us have experienced is some people are putting in more work and more effort on anything, whether that be where are we going to dinner with friends, or the next group vacation, or in an organization. And typically you want to have people that are closer into the decision making and like what's going on, have more authority. So they're not flat per se. Maybe we'll talk about that a little bit later. But they are something that's much more transparent on what's happening for proposals or funds or governance. And so there's lots of examples, and we can talk about those if you want to. How DAOs can really facilitate organization and collaboration, and they can offer a new paradigm. But that's a little slice into what they're about.
Yeah, can you give some examples of DAOs that you're thinking of?
So Obviously, there's lots of ones that are more rug pulley and trying to just take advantage of a new system to pull the wool over people's eyes. But there's some that are really doing great work in decentralization. Like I think of like Bankless, which is massive, and all the things that they were trying with bottom-up governance. Coordinate is specifically geared to how do we collectively figure out how to reward each other, both financially and with more authority and power. And like HAT protocol plays really well with that. Consensus was a massive organization that was really trying to run in a very libertarian and egalitarian fashion, and they had awesome experiments that were coming out of that, like Sobel.io, that was like mapping the various and like just basically being able to show the organization to itself. Nester.io, which does something similar, or like Hilo was another great example where they actually returned the money back to the investors to create a product for communities that want to organize. So all of these things are creating a lot of value just based on people being really interested to drive to some sort of common purpose.
So I'm hearing a lot of words that and terms that I think are like entering the zeitgeist and sound buzzwordy. You know, you're mentioning people, planet, purpose, ESG, crypto. Why are these things important now?
That's such a good question, right? Because the information age has been transformational across the last 30 years, right? There access to be able to connect everything on the other planet, and we might be reaching the end of that useful life, right? That's now not a lack of information, it's too much information. Generative LLMs can create all sorts of misinformation, and so we're shifting from what feels like the information age to the exponential age, right? So the accelerating pace of change is surpassing our ability to adapt as individuals. I hear people talk about things like the poly crisis, right? It's like the intersection of climate change, inequity, and technological option, and political instability, and all of these things feed off of each other and interrelate. And so if we've got instability in the political realm, it's very easy for people to fall back and start burning for heat. And we see that so all across different areas, Africa and various other places. And so the systems that we have, that we built, that we've relied on for the last 100 or 200 years don't feel anymore, right? The organizational, the financial, the systems that we use don't hold up to the challenges we're facing. COVID pandemic was a really crisp example of this, right? I mean, just looking at how companies dealt with it, a few really thrived. Maybe we'll get a chance to talk about some of them here a little bit later, but most were just trying to hold on at best, and a lot of them didn't make it. And the government certainly had a lot more trouble. So how do we change the game? And my basic theory is that instead of focusing on the individual as the unit of leverage, if you focus on teams and what's possible there's a lot more horsepower in terms of what we can accomplish together. Though most people don't know how to make a good team.
I think that's really true. And I think it kind of challenges a lot of certainly sort of like organizing mechanisms in Western culture, right? The focus on the individual that you're talking about. What are some examples you've seen of leaders maybe who understand these concepts that you're talking about, or what a leader able to organize teams better? Like what are some of the features that you would think of either leaders on a team or teams that work well together?
So I've got a couple of friends that are Navy SEALs and ex-Navy SEALs, and I find them ridiculously compelling as leaders, especially when they move over into the corporate world, because they got just that felt and embodied sense of what great leader feels like, and what, more importantly, work feels like when your life depends on somebody else. Like failing to do your job is not an option. So there's this shared purpose and accountability. And what all the Navy SEALs I've talked to, they always say the mission, but the people is why I do this, right? So they care about their teammates first and foremost. And I mean, it makes sense when your life is literally in their hands. What else are you going to do? And you need to know that the other person feels the same way. There's a great expression that they're always saying is like, people don't rise to the occasion, they fall to their level of training. So you have to have those practice and those reps on what it means to work together in hard situations in order to be able to know what I can rely on for the other person. So those are some of the best leaders I've ever seen or had the pleasure to work with.
Well, that sounds really interesting. That kind of seems like it relates back to what you're talking about with the poly crisis too, right? Which is like all these sense of urgency. If we're going to be able to affect change in all these different areas, right? And go towards these purposes and go through all these goals, we're going to have to work together as people. And some of these things, like whether it's AI, even though that seems very technical and inhuman, what emergent organizations seem to have is like a very human approach to it, which is really very cool, I think. Some people might be a little worried, though, when you're talking about taking the emphasis off of an individual and off of like individual leaders and in the hierarchy. Do you see this as a move away from this traditional hierarchy towards a flat hierarchy? Is that what this is?
I think you see a lot of failures with flat. The idea, the conception that we're all created equal in like a very egalitarian way, right? Like every life and every has value, and at the same time, not everybody can contribute towards an idea in the same way. And so, I think I live in San Francisco, and as much as I love the energy and the enthusiasm for trying to make a positive impact in the world, I think it's also a show of what happens when you've got a lot of direct democracy without a lot of information, right? Turns out people want more services and lower taxes. And if you give people a chance to vote for those things twice a year, they very reliably say, I would like to do more and work less. Shock. Right. And so then you end up with a homeless industrial complex and no accountability in the system. Like San Francisco is going through a little bit of a rough spot. There's no doubt about it. At the same time, I think there's a lot of dynamism in San Francisco. I think there's a lot of people that care, and I think what you are more interested in is giving the people that are well informed a chance to go solve this problem or that problem. And so, an example of where I could see this working, maybe in the corporate structure, is Valve. They allow people to pick what the project you are, and you have to recruit the people that follow you. So there's still a leader for the project, but I might be following you one day and you might be following me the next, right? Or I might be following you on this new Steam release, and you might be following me on character development and plot and story. And so we might have different teams that are doing different things. And Cattle is a really interesting organization, but they also had some of the highest earnings per employee in the world. They were, like Facebook and Apple come in at the top end of the spectrum, going at like $400,000 or $500,000 per employee, and Valve was up north of 800,000 for a while. And so there's like, it's just off the charts difference what can happen when you allow more dynamism in your hierarchy. So it's not a flat hierarchy, it's a dynamic hierarchy in my mind.
Okay, that sounds very cool. And that's also what I know about like Google, right? Like Gmail was a project, right? It was like a pet project that somebody was given the time to work on, right? So sometimes these great ideas come from individuals at the company who are given the agency to work on these things, right? And if a company bases their model on it, yeah, it looks like Valve has found great success in that. And that's a really promising and encouraging model that other companies could take on, it sounds like. I want to talk a little bit more, or ask you really, about some of these decision-making models. And it sounds like you're talking about different ways just are made, right? I follow you sometimes you follow me. So Valve is one example you've given. You gave me some earlier, you gave some other examples of DAOs. Can you give even like more concrete examples of how this decision-making framework is already at play in the works and where you're seeing really exciting development happen?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, you were talking about Google and the 20% time, right? I actually think Apple is a master at creating like little teams at the edge of the network, giving them a lot of autonomy and telling them to go off and disrupt a new industry, whether that be wearables or AR or cars. And not all of those things are going to work, right? Like that's part of the beauty. Apple's got a balance sheet where they can afford some massive swings and misses. But they don't need all of them to land to be really transformational for the company, right? So you need to have some protections around what's possible and who's allowed to make decisions. There's somebody from the audience on how do you know who the people in these systems and structures are that are worthy of giving the decisions. What I've seen time and time again is that managers know dramatically less than the collective wisdom of their peers. So if you ask people who they want to follow, they generally have a pretty strong opinion, and that opinion tends to be pretty on point. People don't want people that are just going to give them a raise and not drive towards good results because he knows that's not sustainable, right? We'll kill the goose that laid the golden egg if we do that. So there's a few more examples we could get into. Recruiting and the pandemic could be one, but there's other threads we could go down as well.
Well, we got a question from the audience. I'm wondering if we can answer too. And it was about like future focus groups that could learn from the traditional co-op space. And what do old school co-ops do well and what haven't they done well in the past?
I love the co-op space. The co-ops have been around for hundreds of years, and the fundamental principles of the 7 foundational beliefs of co-ops are right, transformation, right? That like they focus on supporting community, on autonomy, on joining. And I think there's a lot to be taken and inspired from what's possible in the co-op space. The biggest holdback for co-ops is that generally they're small. The mean value is 9. The median is 6. So most of these co-ops are not in a place where they can affect real change. They have great experience in earned living in a collaborative fashion. And so it's a question in my mind on what can we do to take the next level. So I get really excited by Oberon Co-op, which is a conglomerate co-op, and they're buying companies and transforming this way. They're over 500 people. They've acquired 6 companies, and they're trying to really do this at scale, right? So it's taking something like Mondragon in Spain is the most famous co-op in the world, and there are 80,000 people across multiple dozens of business lines. Most of that revenue is actually derived outside of Spain. Like they've proven that they're very competitive on the international market. So can we create other entities like that? That's why I get really pumped about what Quorum One is up to, right? It feels like a real instantiation of this ethos with a lot of technology and sophistication in how the world actually works today layered on top.
I couldn't agree more. I think that's really exciting. We got another really interesting question in the chat that I want to go to. So it's an audience question about trust. And I think it really plays off what you were talking about managers and people not always wanting to follow the manager, right? And people in kind of knowing who they trust in the group and who has the great ideas. And how do you find those people on the team? How do people know who is the most capable, trustworthy, knowledgeable people to solve these problems sometimes if it's not people in a hierarchy? How do we know within new systems and structures who should be making and leading decisions?
Well, you could go the exceptional, aggressive way of doing it, like Bridgewater does, where people are literally ranking each other on a little app in every meeting on how trustworthy, how well are they at communicating, how much can they effectively see around corners, and 24 other attributes that Bridgewater thinks is defining of success. And that's worked for them as being the most successful capital management firm in the history of the world. That asks a lot of people in the resilience that is there. I also like maybe a little bit of a tame down model on this with what Hire is doing. Again, a massive company, the largest white goods manufacturer in the world. They actually bought GE Appliance from GE. There are 100,000 plus employees. They've got 5,000 different teams. So they've got all of these different go-to-market teams. Somebody raises their hand and says, I'd like to go work on X, Y, or Z, and they recruit the people to come follow them. And the company like seeds their of their funding, and they've got the customer base and the support structure built in. And so I really see the things that Form One is doing is like you build the trust based on existing relationships, and when you have those existing relationships, they elevate certain people that have shown they make good decisions, not just financially, but also interpersonally. Like I don't take too much credit for what's going on. I think for the core one people that are in the audience, I think we can all think of several people in core one that we trust deeply and implicitly because we've had these relationships worked over, maybe just from our time within core one, maybe from four. Both have value and information that shouldn't be disregarded.
Are there ways too that you can keep these structures still an emergent organization? Because it seems like there are maybe certain people who have either developed these skills or who naturally engender more trust within a team. Is there a risk that then these teams could kind of fossilize into a hierarchy or become more strict hierarchical?
Yeah. Oh, that's such a good question, right? I really see most run in a fashion that's very in line with like emergent organizations or self-management or heal right up until they're 20 or 25 people. Some of the ones that are growing faster hold on to that till they're 50 or 70, but somewhere along the way somebody comes in and says like, oh well, we need like a adult supervision in here. We need to have it, and that typically means we need an old command and control hierarchy. I need to know whose throat to choke. Every decision should be a hippo decision, where it's the highest paid person's opinion is what rules. And so, in order to counteract that, it actually takes quite a bit of intentionality at a very specific stage. It's typically around that 20 to 40 person stage, the place where I know everybody, but I don't know them well, right? And that's the time when I don't know what I can trust them for and what I can't. That's when some structures to create more intentional visibility to create clarity is really, really important. Um, and so I think there's an intervention. I also think most people haven't had the chance to experience what it's like working in an organization where they have a lot more autonomy. I know living in San Francisco, I know lots of people that are just addicted to the early stage of the startup. It's not the most profitable. It's by far not the easiest, but they love that piece. And I would say 80% of them, what they really love is the autonomy to work on hard problems with brilliant people in a situation that actually matters. And so we can create like most of them say, I just lost that feeling when we hit a certain stage. And to me, I think a lot of that is that lack of control and that lack of trust, because we need some more predictability. And so predictability means the easiest way to get predictability is we chop down all of the tallest blades of grass, and then we have a very predictable field to play on. It's not the best ideas. It's not the fastest growth that we're rewarding. It's the most understandable, and you lose all of the best ideas that way.
Really, and I'm sure too that you come across in your work and your coaching that you have some naysayers too who are used to being the ones who are making all those decisions, right? They're used to the kind of like top-down decision making. And when you're introducing these more bottom-up decision making frameworks, that they don't want to play that way, right? Like they don't want to kind of give up some of this power. What is one way that you counteract these concerns on consensus with speed, right? Because especially for startups, they're used to when startup workers are working with all this autonomy and all this agency, right? They're able to work on these projects and go really fast. And then all of a sudden, like there's concern around like layers of bureaucracy, right? All of a sudden I have to go and get permission from 2 or 3 people to get approval for a project or to do this. And I don't know who I have to go to, get the marketing proposal done that I need to or whatever. So when you're balancing consensus with speed, what are some approaches you can take to continue to move forward when you are still gathering multiple voices in decision-making processes?
Right? Like one of the things that I see CEOs willing to acknowledge that a lot of people don't is that most ideas are actually not very good, right? And most ideas are kind of crap. Now, people move up the hierarchy in traditional organs, sometimes by having more good ideas, usually by having less bad ideas. So you can rely on the percentage to at least get on base from people higher up the chain. It's often what leaders are looking for, right? And so a lot of things are set up so that the person above you in the hierarchy is filtering out your bad ideas before they get passed along. But that actually means you're filtering out a lot of good ideas as well. So there's one way you could still do this in the hierarchy. Amazon's famous for this. Like if you've got an idea and you disagree, if your manager disagrees with you, they have to write a 2-page memo on why. So it shifts the burden from the individual trying to convince that person to the manager having to refute it. It's just phenomenal. AWS came up this way. Nobody could say why this was a bad idea that they shouldn't proceed. And now they've got a business that would be a Fortune 50 company if it was spun out, right? Just because nobody could find a great reason on why we shouldn't do this. Nothing to do with Amazon's traditional services. I think you can see that without having to have nearly the same hierarchy. I like EE out of UK. They use the advice process that comes from a book, The Decision Maker by Dennis Fakey. It's a pretty book, short read, highly recommend. And the entire idea is I can make decisions up to a certain threshold. I just need to get other people's opinions into the mix. And so distributes the decision making very much in the same way that Agile does, where, I don't have to take everybody's advice. I should probably gather it because it might change my opinion, my perspective. And especially if I'm on the hook for the results of this decision, people's attention to the details and the minutiae and all of the things that come into play goes up real quickly in my experience.
That's awesome. So I want to take a quick shift here because one of the things I want to be sure that we talk about is your book, right? You just mentioned The Decision Maker by Dennis Fakey. But in your book, Lead Together, which you co-authored, you talk about the benefits of choosing peer-based relationships and meaningful work over profit and rapid growth. And you talk to all these different businesses from all around the world to inform the writing of this book. And can you summarize those benefits are for the audience real quickly?
So the big thing that we saw was a much degree of ability to deal with the complexity. So whether that's facing an economic downturn where you normally have to face layoffs, or where you've got to capitalize on an adjacent opportunity, AI is presenting a phenomenal opportunity for lots of companies, most of which have no idea how to tap into this. It's why most S&P 500 companies don't make it more than 11 years in the S&P 500, right? That's down from over 40 years ago. So there's this massive trend that we're going to be facing all of these disruptions. And so how do we tap in to the wisdom of the crowd without getting the idiocy of the crowd, right? Well, like, how do we get to something that is much more like a raise recruiting and not idiocracy in what we're trying to do? You know what? I'll just take a minute because I even mentioned Raise More once, and I'll just share that story. All right, because they were a recruiting agency that was facing the same challenge that every recruiting agency was at the beginning of the pandemic. Their revenue went away like that. 80% of their revenue was gone in 4 weeks. So most companies would have hard decisions to make. There's no doubt, right? They would almost certainly do layoffs. All of their competitors did. They would have been on that journey for some years. They would have been trying to right the ship. They'd already been running in a more distributed and self-managed way for a couple of years. And so people automatically said, you know what, I would love this time. I'll just take furlough. You don't need to pay me. I would love to go travel around right now. Other people took reduction in salaries, but the most interesting thing is the people that started convening and experimenting with new ideas, right? And so one of the ideas was, well, what's needed now? Well, it turns out a lot of governments needed to hire a boatload of contact tracers in a hurry. Not a thing that they had any experience in, but they're like, well, let's try this. It was one of a dozen experiments. They tried it out. It started gaining power, and then it turns out those contact tracers needed managers. And so, boom, like, all right, well, I guess we can offer this service. We actually know a lot about how to onboard and upskill people in a very short amount of time. That's one of our core skills. Let's do that as well. They ended up, like, from going down 80%, they were up 600% year over year. So, like, that's the real power of dealing with these shocks, is that in every shock, there is an opportunity that presents itself. And most organizations are not well structured to capitalize that and to tap into the wisdom of the crowd.
I love that. And I love talking about the wisdom of the crowd versus, let's say, diplomatically, not great decisions that the crowd tends to make sometimes, right? Settling for mediocrity over great ideas like Ray's recruiting did. Are there other examples of companies that you've seen in your research that do really great work as a team that stand out in your mind?
Oh, let's see. We've talked about Rays and hair. You know, like one that I also love. Again, it's maybe my Silicon, but Culture Amp. One, because just the idea of showing people the culture and what's working in a quantitative way is really useful for those of us that are nerds and engineers and like data to go with our. Like the thing that I was most shocked about what they did is they analyzed all these people and what motivates them. And, you know, it's no shock that career development, challenges, meaningful work, good team were really high on everybody's list. Right. And they're like, okay, great. Every CEO I've talked to says, yeah, but my salespeople are motivated by closing deals and making money. And so has the data and says, nope, 100% incorrect. Turns out they are mostly people and occasionally they sell. They are motivated by the exact same thing that everybody else is motivated by. Weird. And so they flipped the script on what they were doing, and they're like, yes, salespeople should still have quotas, but culture and salespeople don't have commissions. So people want to know how they're doing and how they're being measured, like, and what does great look like. People like a good challenge, but it turns out the paycheck was not what was motivating the great performance. And when you remove that incentive, like I spent 10 years in tech sales. Every great salesperson is great at one thing. That is choosing a territory where they can crush it. All right, whether that's the company that they select or the territory that they argue for. Occasionally, they're good at selling as well. But so when you remove that incentive to tweak the system to your favor, you get a lot better. It's like shocking that it's not shocking.
Okay. I love that, right? The humanity in it, and that even salespeople are people, right? I think that's hilarious the way you put that. Let's dig into that a little bit. So you are a manager in a company, right? So many of the audience members today are Quorum One members or members of who kind of get it. And say you're not part of an emergent organization yet, but you want to be part of this change, this future of work, right? How can you be a leader in any organization and use some of these principles to encourage participation and engagement from members of your team, starting now?
I mean, people don't leave companies, people leave managers. My wife is literally following her manager to the next company because of how good he was that she sought him out. And that's amazing as the opportunity that's there. If you can be a good leader, right? 80% of managers are not good, according to Gallup, right? They do not engender that loyalty. So it's 1 out of 5. And the criteria that I always see is that they want to be a good manager and leader. Lots of people want other things. They want the positional power. They want to be in the room where it happens. They want the prestige. They want the money, whatever it might be. If they want to be a good manager, it's you will get there very quickly, right? If you're doing the things where you're listening to the feedback on your team and enacting that, it's virtually impossible not to get there pretty quickly. Second best thing you can do after that is find peers that are around you that believe things that are more in line with how you want to be. I hear a lot of managers, especially in Silicon Valley, they'll espouse theory Y over theory X, right? Theory X being people are motivated by the external motivations on rewards and punishments. Theory Y on people are motivated by intrinsic and what can I do? And the data is wildly conclusive. The theory Y is the actual theory that motivates the vast majority of people the vast majority of the time. Not everybody, not all the time, to be clear. So people espouse theory Y, but then they hang out with people that say, well, like that person's really lazy, and like nobody wants to work anymore, and like all these subtle things just slowly creep into the back of your mind, and they basically erode your desire to want to be a good manager. And that's what I see over time is people just lose that will to care about the other people with all the million other things that they've got to worry about in the world today.
Yeah, and it sounds kind of like you're talking, in my mind at least, about the difference between like being a boss and being a leader, right? Like telling people where to go versus like actually listening to people and asking for participation and getting that feedback and working as a team, right? I want to go to kind of to that topic again about leadership, right? How do good collaborative leaders deal with conflict and navigate these like challenges that might come about when there are differing opinions about where to go for like directionally with the team, or if there are different priorities amongst team members? How do you balance that as a good leader within an emergent organization, or how do emergent organizations work within their framework to mitigate those challenges and conflicts?
So I think many people try and minimize conflict. So conflict comes from Latin and it literally means to strike together, and I think of it as a possible chance for sharpening the sword. So how do you leverage the good that can come out of conflict? Because conflict can also stab and kill, and like people don't want to work in high conflict offices and environments. And usually what they mean by that is they don't want to work in a place where conflicts don't get resolved. We don't have a way to address differences of opinions. And so the collaborative that I love, and I got this one actually from a collaborative leader that I love, Edwin Jansen, who's got a co-op really in the recruiting space. But this one is the conflict model on, like, first and foremost, have try and facilitate the conversation between the people having the conflict. Can they work it out? Do they have the tools? Personally, I think nonviolent communication is one of the best tools for working through conflict. I don't love the name because it actually has very little to do with violence in conflict, or it doesn't have to. It's just a way to collaboratively sense needs and come to a better resolution. But if you can't get there interpersonally, use some help from other people. And so what I tend to tell leaders a lot is don't let yourself get triangulated. Don't let like Bob come to you and say they've got a problem with Susie, and and then you're going to talk to Susie without Bob. You're like, great. But how can I help you and Susie talk through this together? What do you need? Like, because there's skills that Bob and Susie need in that situation to be able to address it. And then there's ways to keep on going beyond that. But 99% plus of conversations and conflicts can be sorted out with just these first two levels. And so that's the way to bring in that collaboration in my mind that I think is underused but relatively simple.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me, because I think, conflict arises when you have any two people working together at any point, right? Like shared purpose, shared goals, great. But at some point you're going to have different ideas and a different opinion on how to do things. And that is what conflict is, right? It doesn't inherently have to be a negative thing. It can be actually really energizing to try out those different ideas and to work through together. And interpersonal conflict can clear the air, because when you do have people who are hopefully very passionate about their purpose and love doing what they're doing and love working with their team, different opinions arise, right? So it can be cathartic and wonderful to kind of work through these things. It doesn't have to be something to shy away from. I totally see what you're saying. I want to kind of start wrapping up the conversation, but this is maybe the question I am looking forward to most hearing your answer on. And it really kind of gets down to what the series is all about, which is the future of work, right? So how do you see the role of collaborative leadership evolving into the future, particularly with all of these rapidly changing work environments and societal trends happening right now and where they are?
So I am no longer, though I definitely used to be, the techno-optimist, a la Steven Pinker. And like, I do think the long arc of human history bends towards good. There are plenty of blips where things regress, whether that be the Black Plague or Hitler or Mao's Great Leap Forward, where there's a real risk with the polycrisis that we slip into something that is much more dystopian than we are right now. And I just have a father. I'm a father for the first time. Our baby daughter's 1 year old, and like that really brought it home for me that we owe it to her. I owe it to her, and as much as I can enlist anybody else to help support the future generations, we need to step up. And to me, this is too big of a problem for any one smart person to solve. Right? I think Elon Musk has done some really interesting things in getting us back into space and forwarding the EV, and he's going off the rails right now, just trolling people on X. Like, I don't know what the heck is going on, and it just shows that individual people are really the solution, no matter how great they are. It has to be this collaborative leadership where we're all coming together, where we're all challenging each other to be better, but also like checking each other on our blind spots, and our gaps in our thinking. And to me, like this problem can only be solved, these polycrises, by drawing a much bigger circle around the problem, which is going to require a much bigger circle on who needs to be there helping and supporting to solve it.
I love that. Yeah, we have to be smart enough to know that we're not always the wisest person in the room, right? And wise enough to know that we're not all that smart, right? I think.
Well said.
Yeah. Well, hopefully there is room for some optimism. I think the future of work that you're talking about with these emergent organizations, with some of these companies that are hopefully pointing us into the right direction with collaborative leadership and with these newer models of making decisions, are really exciting. So Travis, thanks so much for taking the time. We're going to open it up now to some questions in the chat. I know that we have a good audience with us today. Thanks everybody for joining. Let's see if we didn't get to anything. I know that we were able to pepper in some of these questions.
There's a fun one about voting, and
Yeah.
when is it useful? And and this was tied in with the idea co-ops often have a one member, one vote. And so I think it's hard to scale one member, one vote. And the co-ops I've seen that have gone larger than that have some sort of democracy, right? The system that I really like is like a federated up sort of levels of voting where teams elect a representative to speak for them at the next level up, and that those representatives can be recalled at any point. So if the team says, no, you're not serving our best interest, get your ass back here, then they have the power and the authority to do that. But there's an assumption that there's a level of detail that's going on in this next level of conversations that's hard to do. So Bankless was trying a version of this in the DAO space. There was organization of the children's democracy in India that was doing this across like lots of different communities, like thousands of different communities, right? You can imagine that this is very fractal in nature and it's easy to scale up quite quickly. So you can just add another layer and expand your reach by 10 or 20x. So you don't have to have that many layers before a federated system could account for all the people on the globe. So that is one of the best systems I see on voting. The other thing I would say about voting is voting follows the law of the wisdom of the crowd, right? The wisdom of the crowd was specifically defined to work in specific instances. One, when people's ideas are independent, where one person doesn't influence, and where the ideas can be aggregated. So a bunch of farmers guessing the weight of a cow at the county fair is a stellar example of where the wisdom of the crowd very quickly narrows in on a good weight. But when you have decisions, is it this decision, that decision, that decision, and they're all mutually exclusive? Well, when 40% vote for this and 20% vote for that, how do you integrate that different knowledge that's there? And that's a time when I see voting be less useful, but ranked choice voting starts to even that out a little bit more. Hopefully that's some perspective that would be useful for those that were asking about that.
Yeah, I think that really helped clarify it for me, at least. I think this was excellent. Travis, thank you so much for your time today. Thank you so much for walking us through it. Your examples really illustrated so much of these benefits that emergent organizations have to offer. And thank you so much for your time. This is going to be all available online on Quorum One's YouTube page and LinkedIn. So I hope everybody will keep their eyes peeled for it there. I hope also if you haven't already subscribe to the YouTube channel, you'll be doing that. Or followed us on LinkedIn, you'll be doing that. And you can do that as well for Travis. I'm also going to make sure that we share in the Slack channel Travis's LinkedIn page as well, and some of the resources. I know we talked about his book, Lead Together, and I'll put a link out for that as well today. But Travis, thank you so much. And we'll see you next time for the next episode of the Future of Work series. Thanks, everybody.